Hi guys, welcome back. In episode 1 we talked about the importance of adjusting your work to your context. And because many of the exercises that you look for in the internet are set up for adult professionals, it means that its dimensions are not transferable to most teams. So for that reason, one of the key challenges that coaches face is deciding on which dimensions to use on the exercises. Related to this, I've also witnessed many coaches complain that they don't have enough space to work on the things that they want to train. In this episode, we will share some ideas on how you can get your dimensions right and explain why having little space doesn't have to be a problem. So here are a few of the things that you need to take into consideration before you start developing your training sessions. The first nuance we need to address is the age group that we're training. Planning a training session for adults is different than planning a training session for kids. The reason behind this is that coaches must have extra attention to the physical aspect of the adult players, mostly because of the accumulation of fatigue and increase in injury risk. For example, if you're coaching adults, it's important that you set up a day, for example, to train strength. And if you want to train strength, then you should use smaller spaces that promote more accelerations and more breaks. If you want to train resistance or stamina, for example, then you should go with larger spaces so that your players have more space to run and have to cover bigger distances. On the other hand, if you're coaching kids 2 or 3 times per week, then you don't need to have these concerns, since the kids can cope with back-to-back high-intensity trainings due to their ability to recover much faster than adults. Secondly, even at the elite level, you can find teams working in half a pitch because they want to save the grass for game day. If you go outside the elite level, it will be even more common for you to find teams sharing training fields. If you take an 11-a-side pitch, it will be very easy for you to find up to 4 teams of young kids training at the same time. Personally, I was a coach for a couple of seasons of a 20-player squad of ages under 12 and under 13, in a space that was no bigger than 48 by 24 meters. At first sight, it seemed like the players didn't have enough space to run, or that the stronger kid could just take the ball, shoot from anywhere and score a goal. Although the space was small, it didn't stop me from teaching them game principles like covering, holding, mobility, and many others. The catch is, this situation made me find creative solutions to make it work with the space that I had available. And that's what you will be able to see in the practical example later in this video. Another layer of space-related problems is misreading the situation. Just like as coaches, athletes also have a learning curve. So if the exercise is not running at optimal pace in the first 2 minutes, we need to be able to understand if it is because of the dimensions of the exercise, of the player's inability to understand the exercise, or the player's inability to use the space properly, which is something that you can fix with feedback. If the problem really has to do with dimensions, then one of the things that coaches usually do in an early stage of the career, and I've done it and I've seen other people do it, is they set up the exercises glued to each other. So if you need to make a change mid-exercise, you're left with no space to maneuver. Having laid out some of the problems that coaches face regarding dimensions, let me share with you some of the ideas that have helped me make the most of the space that I have available. To begin with, I think it's very important that you have a very clear idea of the space that a player needs to perform certain actions. For example, if your team needs to train on long shots, how long are we talking about? For me, in 11-a-side football, training for this will require at least a shot from 20 meters, which is roughly the length of the box. So, knowing this, automatically I have 20 meters plus X meters that represent the space that the player will have to run or play in before making the shot. This means that I will need at least 30 to 40 meters or even more of length to train long shots. What if your team needs to train quick combinations in front of the box? If those actions happen in front of the box, then I know that I will need a width of around 40 meters, which is roughly the width of the box in any game. If on the other hand, you want to train through balls to the back of the last defender, then how much space should you count on between the goalkeeper and the defender to fulfill the purpose of your training exercise? The second thing I want you to think about is where in the pitch do the actions that you're training for occur? And also, in what areas of the field does it represent a greater risk for you if you lose the ball? I think it is unanimous that it is in the first third of the pitch because of the proximity to your goal. So the way I've come to think about this is, the greater the risk, the more precision I want to see. And to achieve more precision, I think it makes sense to replicate as closely as possible the conditions that the players will face in the game. For that reason, if I'm training to build out from the back, then I would use the whole width of the pitch so that the players are familiar with, for example, the positioning that they need to have and the weight of the pass that they need to do in the game. To make my point, let's go to the other end of the spectrum. If you're trying to open up a defense, you're probably looking for a 1-2 combination to create space. That action, more than precision, requires speed and movement, and that's okay because the risk, if you lose the ball, is smaller to you. So what I would suggest is that if you use a narrower pitch in the training, you will increase the number of repetitions and speed up the thought process of the players. Thirdly, how do you tackle the length-width dilemma? To address that, I think coaches should have a very clear idea of what they want from their team and what they want from their exercise. For example, if you want your team to run a lot or play that vertical pass to the frontal support, would you add more length or more width to the exercise? On the other hand, if you're training patience on the ball or making the most of your fullback's crossing, what would you do? This is a starting point, but this alone doesn't solve the problem. For example, if I know that I will want 20 meters of length, how do I decide the width? For example, a big field will have 105 per 68 meters approximately. So most of the fields that you work in will be probably smaller than that. This represents a ratio of 1.5, which means that for each meter of width, I will add 1.5 meters of length. So that can work as a reference point. Adding to this, during my master thesis, I read some articles that argued that the recommended ratios for training sessions should be between 1 and 1.3. All of this combined means that if I want 20 meters of length, I will usually go up to 25 or 30 meters of width. Working back and forth with these ratios is completely dependent on the quality of the players and the number of players that you will need on the exercises. However, it has helped me out a lot to work with these. One last thing, how do you cope with short spaces and a big number of players? Let me address it shortly. For sure, if you don't have space for everyone, some of them will have to wait. But what kind of exercises do you use that keep players waiting? And to make you think a bit more, what kind of constraints can you use to make their wait shorter and less painful? Think about that and check the practical example later in the video. To sum up, knowing exactly the dimensions of some game-related actions, assessing the areas of the field where some actions occur, working back and forth with recommended ratios, and stretching your brain to find creative solutions will definitely get you closer to working out the dimensions for your exercises. On top of all this, the more experience you have, the easier it will become for you to manipulate variables like the number of players, the quality of the players, the task and the objective of the exercise that you are setting up to get your dimensions right. This happens because you start to understand what works and what doesn't. Now let's see how all of this works in practical terms. Now, to show you how all of this adds up in practical terms, I will show you one exercise that I used a lot when I was coaching in the space of 48 meters of length by 24 meters of width. Basically, this is a 1v1 situation where the two players meet in the middle and the player with the ball needs to dribble his counterpart and then choose whether he wants to shoot to this goal or shoot to this goal, but always by means of a long shot. So the way I decided the dimensions of this exercise was, I thought for these guys, for this context, under 12s and under 13s, that a good long shot distance would be 18 meters. So I proceeded to put two black lines 18 meters away from the goal. Now, from the 48 total meters that I have available, I already used 36. So how much space do I have left for them to play in the middle, and is it enough? Well, because this is a 1v1 situation, and also I will want other players to come in, I don't need to wait for these two guys to finish their job. I believe that 12 meters will be more than enough for them to dribble and shoot right away from a long distance. Adding up to this, if the guy crosses the line, I would incentivize him to turn back, to step on the ball, and dribble this guy again and try to shoot on the other goal. So that way I guarantee that they're always doing long shots. Now, how do I decide if the width is good? So basically in this exercise, I wanted them to sprint for a distance between 10 to 15 meters. So the 24 divided by 2 makes for a 12-meter sprint for each player, the one with the ball and the one without the ball. So I believe that it is more than enough for them, and that's how I get to the dimensions of this exercise, 48 by 24. In this next example, we will show you how you can go from having a little space and turn it into a bigger space without taking anything away from the others. The way we set up the exercise is 4 against 4 with 2 bouncers, but really the formation is the least important thing, as it depends on your context and the number of players that you have available. Just pay attention at the way that we manipulate the dimensions that we have available here. So imagine we're stuck with a space of 30 meters of width and 25 meters of length to train, for example, playing out the back. So we would ask the white team to pass the ball and try to find space so they can get to the end zone safely and with the ball controlled. The thing is, as soon as they reach the end zone, they would activate a mirroring effect in which they have to turn, and now their objective is to score a goal in the big one without the red ones intercepting the ball. What happened here is that we went from having 30 meters of width and 25 meters of length to having 25 meters of length one time towards the end zone and having 25 meters again towards the big goal. This adds up to a space of 30 meters by 50 meters, making the players run a lot more and allowing you to train more than just playing out the back and training, for example, those 1-2 combinations near the goal to score a goal. In this last example, we will show you how you can cope with having a small space but a high number of players. As you can see on the screen, we are doing an exercise for 20 players, goalkeepers included. So the way we went about this was we divided the players into 2 teams. We have the white ones spread over 3 lines and the same thing for the reds. This goalkeeper will play for the whites and this goalkeeper will play for the reds. As soon as the ball is played to one of the goalkeepers, which is the starting point, one from each line will go in, generating then a 3v3 situation. Now, you still have a lot of people waiting on the line, so one way that you can activate them is that if the goalkeeper doesn't have any solution in the middle and wants to create an advantage, he can pass the ball directly to the line, and as soon as the guy in the line receives the ball, he becomes active and he can go inside, making then a 4v3 situation. You can take this until you have a 5v5 or a 6v6 situation. It really depends on your context and your objective. But what we need you to understand here is that you will still have people in the lines, but they will be more engaged with the exercise, and you will promote a quicker rotation of players. So therefore, their waiting time is shorter and it becomes less painful for the players. For the last part of the video, I will answer a question that came up in our WhatsApp group that read like, how do you decide whether you should use small-sided games, medium games, or large games? Well, from the perspective of evolution of the session, it makes more sense to start with more simple tasks in smaller spaces and move on towards larger spaces, maximum to play 11 against 11. This way you can start with simple input to the players that will help them in more complex situations later on. Then it also depends on what kind of input you want to give to your players. If you want to give them tactical input, then it makes more sense to use larger spaces and larger games like 10v10, 10v8, 9v7. If you want to go with a more technical approach, then I would suggest a smaller space where you can promote 1v1 with dribbling, 2v1, finishing, and etc. The key idea here is that you adjust your space and the complexity of your exercise to promote a higher number of repetitions of what you want to train. Now, in the next episode, we will talk about mimicking the competitive environment in training. So comment below one key strategy that you have that makes your players go the extra mile in training. If you want extra resources, send an email to hello@freecoachtalks.com and join our WhatsApp group, for which you can find the link in the description. Thank you for watching.